You thought it was your personality, the way you react, the way you withdraw, the things you tolerate, the things you fear, the things you chase automatically, without fully understanding why. You thought those movements belonged to you, as if they emerged naturally, as if they reflected something essential about who you are. But many of the patterns people call identity were repeated into them long before they learned how to question what they were becoming. That is what conditioning does. It hides repetition inside familiarity until behavior no longer feels learned, only personal, only natural, only me. Most conditioning does not arrive dramatically. It does not introduce itself. It does not say, "This will shape you." It happens quietly, through repetition, through atmosphere, through emotional reward and punishment, through what receives approval, through what creates tension, through what becomes associated with safety, belonging, acceptance, or rejection. And because these patterns are absorbed gradually, people rarely experience them as external influence. They experience them as reality itself. A child notices which emotions create discomfort, which reactions bring distance, which behaviors produce approval, which parts of themselves must become quieter to preserve connection. No formal lesson is required. The nervous system learns anyway. It studies tone, expression, silence, timing. It memorizes tension. It adapts to emotional weather long before language can explain what is happening. And over time, adaptation becomes automatic. What began as survival slowly becomes identity. That is why so many people confuse conditioning with personality, because the repetition started early enough to feel original. If something has moved through you for long enough, you stop experiencing it as influence. You begin experiencing it as yourself. The reaction feels immediate, natural, instinctive, but immediacy does not prove authenticity. Automatic behavior often only proves familiarity. This is how invisible systems survive, not by forcing behavior directly, but by shaping what feels normal, what feels acceptable, what feels expected. And once expectation stabilizes, most people stop questioning it, because the structure no longer feels imposed. It feels obvious. The person believes, "This is simply who I am," without noticing how much of that identity was assembled through repetition, adaptation, and reinforcement. Some people learn that silence keeps them safe, so they become quiet. Some learn that usefulness creates value, so they become necessary to everyone. Some learn that vulnerability creates danger, so they become emotionally distant. Some learn that approval must be earned constantly, so they become unable to rest. Years later, these patterns no longer feel learned. They feel like character, like temperament, like truth. But many identities are only survival strategies that remained active long after the original environment disappeared. And because conditioning operates through repetition, it becomes difficult to detect, especially when everyone around you reinforces the same structure, the same emotional rhythms, the same fears, the same expectations about success, deserving, control. At that point, the pattern no longer feels personal. It feels cultural, collective, invisible precisely because it is shared. Most people imagine control as something obvious: authority, rules, restriction. But the deepest forms of influence rarely feel controlling. They feel normal, effortless, self-generated. Because once a pattern is internalized successfully, the system no longer needs to force it externally. The person continues it automatically, defends it voluntarily, repeats it unconsciously, and calls the repetition choice. That is why awareness can feel deeply unsettling, because once you begin noticing how much of your behavior was conditioned into familiarity, You also begin questioning what else inside you arrived through repetition, which fears are truly yours, which desires were inherited, which ambitions were installed, which emotional reactions were rehearsed so many times. They became indistinguishable from instinct, and that questioning can destabilize identity itself because the structure no longer feels entirely solid. But noticing conditioning does not erase it immediately. Patterns repeated for years do not disappear because they become visible once. The nervous system still trusts familiarity, still returns to known sequences, still follows emotional routes that once guaranteed adaptation, even after awareness arrives. Which is why change often feels slow, not because people are weak, but because repetition builds structure, and structure does not dissolve instantly. First, the difference is small. A pause before reaction, a strange awareness inside familiar behavior, a moment where something automatic no longer feels entirely convincing. The old pattern still happens, but now it feels visible, observed, less seamless than before. And that matters, because once a pattern becomes visible as conditioning, it loses part of its authority. It no longer feels completely unquestionable. The reaction still exists, but the illusion that it emerged naturally begins to weaken. That is often where freedom actually begins, not in becoming someone entirely new, but in recognizing that much of what felt inevitable was repeated into you slowly enough to feel like identity. And once you see that clearly, something changes. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough for another possibility to begin appearing beneath the repetition, enough for awareness to arrive slightly earlier than the automatic response, enough for the old structure to stop feeling absolute, enough to realize that some parts of you were never truly you to begin with.